What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is good to be back after a fantastic week out at the Senior Bowl. I'm going to be uploading this here on the main channel, but also over on the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. So while we're here on the main channel, I might as well remind you that I do have a podcast, the Fully Inflated Football Show. That link is in the description below if you want to follow along to the podcast. We got more going on than just what's being posted on the main channel here. Also, if you couldn't tell, pardon the sniffles and nasally voice. I had an incredible week down there in Mobile, but I definitely caught something. This is going to be my flu game because I am struggling, but the show must go on. We are going to be reacting to the practices from the Senior Bowl, talking about who had a big week, who might be rising with their draft stock, and maybe who struggled a little bit down there at practice and is maybe seeing their stock fall a little bit here. And for anybody that has followed the Senior Bowl, this week is all about, number one, the weigh-ins to see, what their arm length are, what's, height, weight, all that big stuff, because these college rosters literally lie all the time. Like, for example, Xavier Legette was listed at 6'3", and he comes in at 6'1", and it's like, all right, well, that kind of changes the whole DK Metcalf comp thing. So, like, the weigh-ins are a big deal, your first kind of official listings for these guys for height, weight, and then it's about how do these guys interview and not, with the media, with the coaches, how do they interact throughout the week in a foreign setting with new coaches. And then third, and most of all, it is about the one-on-one reps, specifically with the wide receivers going up against the cornerbacks, as well as the offensive line going up against the defensive line. It is very difficult to take too much away from the other positions. Quarterback, for example, there's not really any bullets flying, right? Maybe for the actual game you might judge them, but even then it's very vanilla and, go watch the tape for the quarterbacks is what I would say. Maybe a little bit of like accuracy issues or whatever. Like if you have a bad week at the Senior Bowl, you might be a little bit worried for these quarterbacks, but quarterbacks you're not taking too much from. Running backs, linebackers, there's really no tackling. So, those are tackling positions, safety as well. And tight ends and safeties, you get a little bit of a look at them, as well as the running backs. You get a little bit of them for one-on-ones. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those position groups from what I saw. But anyway, today we're going to be mostly focused on wide receivers, corners, offensive line, and defensive line. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start with the most exciting position for most people. I mean, I'm a big O-line, D-line guy myself, but we're going to start with the wide receivers because I think that's where most of the people are going to have their most interest. And I kind of sorted these into big risers, good weeks, solid weeks, so-so weeks, and bad weeks. Just kind of group these guys into tiers based on their performances. And the first of the big risers that I'm going to talk about is Georgia wide receiver Ladd McConkey, who he's kind of the lazy answer because anybody that had seen any bit of his film knew that the route running was there and that he was going to be set up to look pretty good in these one-on-one drills. But he was winning to an extent that you walk away like not just wowed, but you feel so good about his floor as a player because, honestly, he is going to enter the NFL as one of the 10 to 15 best route runners in the league the second he gets drafted. I don't think that's crazy. Just look up Ladd McConkey Senior Bowl. You'll see it. The way that he is able to set up his cuts, use subtle misdirection, not just with his hips and his feet and his foot speed, but also with shoulder fakes in his head. He had these DBs guessing all week, and then he pairs it with really good lateral agility, really good acceleration, and good speed, too, to threaten over the top. I mean, he's out here running like double whip routes, say that 5 times fast, where he's faking in, he's faking out, and then he's faking in again and then going out again. And it's like boom, 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 boom. It's just wild, man. I think he is a little bit more slender. We did see one rep against the Kentucky corner where he was dealing with physical press and couldn't really get off it. But then he bounced back and beat some press coverage throughout the week. So he has the release package. He's got the foot speed to get off press. I just see a guy that has such a high floor. He's got solid hands. And my comp for him coming out of this week is Deontay Johnson, who went in the third round and was one of the best route runners I've evaluated for a college prospect, and I see a lot of similarities there with Ladd McConkey. So I don't know how you couldn't walk away impressed by Ladd McConkey, but he was a little bit more expected to do well, but he still went out and did it. The next guy I'm going to talk about here is Jamari Thrash, the wide receiver out of Louisville. And I didn't really know what to expect from him, but I certainly wasn't expecting crazy route running ability from him for whatever reason. But that's what he showed. Just similar to Ladd McConkey in a lot of ways, the way he was setting up breaks and the agility he was showing in some of his cuts, he was really creating a lot of separation in these one-on-ones. But the most impressive rep that Jamari Thrash had for me was on a stop route that he ran, where he was threatening vertical, and then the way that he was able to sink his hips and burst back towards the quarterback popped to me. It was one of the most impressive routes that anybody ran this week because, I think it's one thing to have the agility and the technique in your routes, but to have that ability to decelerate and throttle down was really eye-opening from Jamari Thrash. He also made some big-time catches down the field. He had a really nice over-the-shoulder elevated touchdown catch in the red zone, so he showed some good hands. He's got a fun highlight reel. I can't wait to get into his film from Louisville to see if this sort of a route runner was there on film because from what he looked like at the Senior Bowl, it looks like a second-round wide receiver to me. So I thought Jamari Thrash was really impressive this week. And then another big riser, it's got to be Roman Wilson, who really stole the show. A lot of people talking about Roman Wilson this week as maybe the guy that had the best week this week, and I get it. I mean, he didn't really have a bad rep all week, and he's been kind of a speed guy at Michigan. He's kind of underproduced because they run the ball so much at Michigan. So to see him come out and show the polish as a wide receiver was super impressive, and to show that he's not just a speed guy, which honestly, that was kind of my understanding of Roman Wilson coming into the week. He showed the foot speed in his routes. He showed toughness at the catch point. He showed an ability to kind of get deep and track the ball over the shoulder. Just a complete skill set from Roman Wilson. And, he's getting a lot of hype this week, and deservedly so. I also don't think he had a drop all week, which was a pretty consistent theme from a lot of these wide receivers, not for Roman Wilson. And then another one of these big risers for me is Florida wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. Kind of in the same bucket as Roman Wilson, where he's a little bit shorter, a little bit more slender, but just incredible route running, great speed. I mean, Pearsall had a couple reps where he was able to stack these corners on the outside and threaten vertical, had some tough catches, had some drops as well throughout the week, and to be honest, had a couple of reps where he struggled to kind of deal with some of that physical contact as well within his routes where these corners are grabbing and playing physical. And I would say it bothered Ricky Pearsall with some of that physical coverage a little more than it did with someone like Roman Wilson. But overall, I think Pearsall showed arguably even better route running than Roman Wilson. Just kind of the ability to set guys up with his breaks and the deception within his routes was really impressive. So he definitely popped from the very get-go, Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. And then the last guy I have is a big riser this week is Tulane wide receiver Jaquan Jackson, who was just kind of money all week long. I don't know that he popped as like some remarkable route runner or the fastest guy at practice or the guy making the most difficult catches, but he won seemingly, I don't know the exact number, but probably 80+% of his reps. Was just super confident, collected, was getting open and catching the football. Another guy I'm really excited to get into his tape because I thought he played like maybe a late day 2 type of wide receiver this week. I don't know that is really where people viewed him coming into the week. So I think he probably got himself into the top 100 picks of this draft. And then I have the next category, which were just good weeks, maybe a little bit more bad reps, so to speak, in this group. But still, overall, you walk away feeling pretty good about what they showed down in Mobile this week. And I only have one wide receiver in this category, and that's Malachi Corley, who actually was voted the wide receiver practice player of the week, which was surprising to me. Again, I think the names we've gone through so far probably had better weeks, but I think this is a testament as well to how he was interacting with the coaches and the leadership and how the players perceived him throughout the week as well. And he also, did some big stuff in team drills as well. He had a 40-yard touchdown on a handoff reverse, and that's a big part of Malachi Corley's game. He drew a lot of Deebo Samuel comps coming into the week because he caught dozens and dozens of screens and jet sweeps and was oftentimes used like a running back at Western Kentucky. But in the one-on-one drills, Malachi Corley definitely had more wins than losses, that's for sure. He's not the fastest guy, but he's very thick. I think we might as well check. I think he came in at about 5'11", 215, so the size... Yeah, 5'10 and a half, 215. So the size is very running back-esque, and that's where some of those Deebo comps come in. I don't think he's quite as fast as Deebo Samuel, but he is similar to Deebo in that he's faster once the ball's in his hands than he actually is within his routes. But for Corley, I thought he made some really tough, strong hands catches, which will play, obviously, at the next level. And when he is a thicker wide receiver, you want him to be able to handle that contact down the field and stick those arms out and come down with tough contested catches, especially if he's not going to be the fastest guy or the best route runner. And he definitely displayed that. And then on top of that, I mean, the physicality that is all over his tape was showing up in his routes, almost to a fault. But as we know, you can get away with a lot of pushing within your routes. In college and at the NFL, when he hits the top of his break, he was really extending those arms well to create some added separation. And again, I think that is a positive. Now, you might draw an offensive pass interference every now and again, and he did at the Senior Bowl. He just ran up to a guy 10 yards down the field and just bench pressed him. And the corner was like, what? You can't do that. And they threw the flag on him. So there's a line, of course, but so many receivers do this in the NFL, and it's overall a good thing to kind of know how to tote that line. So I just thought the physicality within his routes showed that he has enough to win down the field, which is only going to be a something that you stack on top of what you can do with him in the screen game, getting manufactured touches in his hands on crossing routes and slants and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, Malachi Corley definitely had a good week. And then we get to, more solid weeks where I would say it's a net positive, but nothing really crazy. And that's going to start with Johnny Wilson, the wide receiver out of Florida State. And I really like Johnny Wilson, I'm going to be honest. He's like the most unique wide receiver you'll ever see. 6'6", 237, built like a tight end, but I do think he's a wide receiver. And he has a very unique play style, at least within his route running and his release for such a big wide receiver. He's actually a pretty good route runner and has a pretty good release off the line of scrimmage. He's clearly worked at it a lot and has kind of refined this unique set of releases and routes that work for him because he has these ridiculously long strides, but he's set them up in a way that it's really hard for DBs to get their hands on him at the line of scrimmage where he's able to kind of, I would say he's pretty good at beating release, but he's just very hit or miss because sometimes when you're that big, it paints a big target for these corners to stick. So if they're able to get their hands inside on him, he will get jammed at the line of scrimmage, but he also has these very wide step releases where he's going to use his length, which he has excellent arm length, 35-inch arms, which is just crazy for a wide receiver. Like, that's most offensive tackles don't have 35-inch arms. So he's able to use that within his release. And again, these wide steps, he can cook guys off the line of scrimmage. And then he actually is pretty good at setting up route breaks. And because his strides are so long, he actually covers a lot of ground and can shake these guys down the field. Now, the reason he's not a big riser for me is he had some uglier reps where he's not particularly fast. He needs to kind of build up. Let me take that back. He has good top speed, but he just doesn't accelerate really well. And when guys are bumping at his hip pocket, he can get stuck on these corners. And there was a lot of reps where he just was not creating a lot of separation. And frankly, he looked like a tight end on some reps. But he also had about half of his reps, if not slightly more than half of his reps, where, again, he was showing good footwork and beating press and creating separation. And then the other thing was his hands were excellent this week. And that's strangely a big question on Johnny Wilson from his tape is drops and inability to come down consistently with contested catches. And at least this week at the Senior Bowl, felt like he went in knowing that was a criticism of him, knowing that that's going to have to be a strength of his game if he's going to be a wide receiver and not a tight end at the next level. And he was sticking those 35-inch arms out, plucking the ball with those hands, showed really good hands consistency this week. So I do think Johnny Wilson had a solid week. And then Xavier Legette, the wide receiver out of South Carolina, we talked about him a little bit at the top of the show. And for one, he just that measure, that the way, I guess it's the measurement, being 6'1" and not 6'3", that just got his week off to a bad start because this is a guy that has been in first round mock drafts. I had him in the first round of my last mock draft because with his speed, with his production at 6'3", that's a guy that you say, hey, he can be like a dominant vertical threat with his speed at 6'3" and at that size. And when he's a lot shorter and his arm length was not great, 31.5-inch arms, he had under 9-inch hands, which is really surprising. Those measurables just leave some question marks in terms of, is that going to be a strength in his game in terms of having a physical advantage over people? So it was a rough start. And then, I think people were being a little bit harsh on what he was doing in the one-on-ones. To be honest, I thought he was actually pretty good in the one-on-ones, which is why I have him in here with these solid weeks. On day one, I felt like he was getting screwed by some inaccurate passes by the quarterbacks where he was getting a half a step on these deep targets and was going to get a chance to show what he can do in these 50-50 down the field balls. But the throws were just super inaccurate. So some of his better reps where he was stacking and getting a half a step, this was on 2 reps in the one-on-ones, I felt like he got screwed over by the wide receivers. And then on day 2, I thought he showed a lot. I thought he showed some good flashes within his route running, which is a big question mark for him, is how polished is he going to be as a route runner. I thought he had a really nice kind of subtle hezzy step on his on his go balls that was effective in getting the corner to think that he was going to be running a comebacker or an out, and then he just was able to not lose any momentum and stack vertically. He had a really nice catch as well on day 2, really good body control catch towards the sideline, showed that physicality to kind of go back and over the DB. Also, like, you see him, he's one of these guys playing with his jersey up over his waistband, and he is ripped. He is ripped out of his mind. It reminds me of like the A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf picture in the gym with how muscular this guy is. So I don't think Xavier Legette had a horrible week, but again, the weigh-in and the measurement being at 6'1" with shorter arms, smaller hands, certainly is not going to help him a ton. Then another guy that I thought had a solid week was Jacob Cowing, the undersized wide receiver out of Arizona, and another smaller wide receiver who really showed off the quickness, showed off the route running. He had a beautiful one-handed catch towards the sideline on day 3, which was good to see considering he had, I think, a couple drops throughout the week. But the only thing is there was some hype that Cowing was maybe going to, like, I don't remember who it was. I think Jim Nagy was talking about this, how someone has like a Deshaun Jackson comparison on Jacob Cowing and that he could be a guy that runs like, 4.2s, 4.3s. I definitely didn't think Jacob Cowing showed off that type of speed. I don't even think he showed up in the top 5 for the fastest wide receivers. I could be wrong about that. They have Zebra technology is like doing the tracking, the speed tracking for these guys. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. I think Tez Walker had the highest speed, but I don't remember Jacob Cowing even being on the top 5. And if that's not a part of his game, he's, I think he's a fun player, definitely draftable. Showed again, really good route running, good quickness. But yeah, when you're out here putting Deshaun Jackson comps on guys, it's going to change the perspective. So I definitely didn't see that type of speed. And then the other guy that had a really solid week is someone that I had never heard of coming into the week. I think he was a late ad. Ryan Flournoy, wide receiver out of Southeast Missouri State. And it's always fun when these small school guys come in, get to go against, Power 5 competition and show up like this. And I'm not saying he dominated all week or was perfect or wowed necessarily, but definitely showed quick feet, good route running. He's a full-size wide receiver, weighed in at 6'1", 200 pounds, 10-inch hands. So, there's pretty good measurables there and made some tough catches. He's a sixth-year player, so, you definitely expect him to be pretty polished. But I definitely think he put himself on the map as, like a day 3 draft pick. And, someone to keep an eye on at the combine. If he's at the combine, can he put up some good numbers there? And that's one of my favorite things about these events is the players from the Southeast Missouri states of the world kind of putting themselves on the map and doing it against a really, really solid cornerback group that was down here in Mobile. Then I have my next tier of, I suppose, grading out these weeks. This is the up and down weeks, guys that showed some good, but certainly showed some bad. Brendan Rice is the only wide receiver that I have in this category. I mean, he got better as the week went on. This is Jerry Rice's son, by the way. But he's a lumbering wide receiver. He really is. He's tall, he's big, but he has some of the worst acceleration. Let's just be nice and say that I saw from these wide receivers this week. You look at him try to get off press and peel away from sticky coverage and accelerate through contact. He doesn't have that juice in him. And I think what we got to see on day 3, where he was much better, where they were doing more like red zone drills, and he wasn't getting as much press coverage, he showed if he's in space, that's where he shows that he's Jerry Rice's son, because he actually, for a bigger wide receiver, actually has a pretty good skill set in terms of route running. And it's not that his feet are slow, he just doesn't accelerate really well. So day 3, he definitely showed up down in the red zone in terms of his ability to shake guys and make some tough catches down there. So he did have a very up and down week. I do not think this is a day 1 or day 2 wide receiver, though, based on what we saw down there at the Senior Bowl, because he was already, maybe a 4th round guy, and he certainly didn't help his stock, in my opinion. And some people might disagree there. Some people said Brandon Rice had a really good week, and I really worry about his ability to separate at the next level. Then we have more like inconsequential weeks, guys that just didn't really stand out one way or another for me. Luke McCaffrey, Ed McCaffrey's son, wide receiver out of Rice, former quarterback. I had a really bad drop on one of his first few reps, hit him right in the chest. I thought he was adequate as a route runner, but really not a lot of highlights, not a ton of lowlights, but again, just a pretty inconsequential week there for Luke McCaffrey. And then Javon Baker, the wide receiver out of UCF, had his best catch on day 3, where he elevated in the back corner of the end zone, made a really nice touchdown grab. But another guy that, again, just not a lot of like highlight routes, had a decent amount of losses. Another guy that kind of struggled with running through contact at times. I thought he was fine. I don't really know what his draft stock was coming into the week, but I definitely don't think he helped it, whatever it was. And then I have 3 wide receivers here that I thought had genuinely bad weeks that hurt their draft stock. Number 1 is Tez Walker, the wide receiver out of North Carolina, who is genuinely getting like first-round draft hype. And I would be stunned if that still exists after this week. And, I had watched Drake May's film when I did Drake May's evaluation, and I tweeted out that these wide receivers really did Drake May no favors in his final year. And some people were like, even Tez Walker, he might go in the first round. And I'm like, which one was Tez? Because there really wasn't anyone while I was watching Drake May, at least, that like popped to me as anything close to like a first round wide receiver. So I was already a little bit skeptical, went in with an open mind to see if he could kind of dominate. But he comes in and he weighs in, I think, at least an inch shorter than they thought he was going to be. He was 6'1 and a half, 197, just 9-inch hands. I want to say he was listed at 6'3 at North Carolina. So comes in a little bit shorter. He was kind of a laughing stock all week for everybody that was down there because of all the drops that he had. And that was a big issue for him in college. He dropped 11% of his passes in his final year at Kent State. And then he had a drop in each of the last 3 games in his final year at North Carolina. He only played 8 games because of a weird like transfer issue with his eligibility. But the drops were insane. It was, he was starting to get like Marquez Valdez-Scantling comps. And he really wasn't doing a ton in terms of the route running. He was kind of similar to Brendan Rice, in terms of like really just struggled to peel away from these physical defensive backs. And yeah, he had a really rough week. Like, we'll see what, and at least he did have like the top time on the Zebra tracker. And if he comes out and has an incredible combine, he could still salvage some good draft stock. But I really don't think he made himself any money this week. Another guy that had a really bad week was Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. He is a wide receiver from Georgia who he's interesting because it feels like we've had a run of these wide receivers from Georgia that just aren't really utilized. And like, these guys are probably highly recruited guys. They probably have some untapped potential in that offense that is run heavy, play action heavy, runs through the tight ends a lot of the time. And Rosemy-Jacksaint really needed a big week to come out and say, okay, you removed me from the Georgia situation and I can be a legit wide receiver. And it didn't happen for him. And it was all of the kind of issues that you would expect from a guy that has the traits but never really produced. It was maybe not even necessarily like bad drops, but it's like, you're overextending and the ball bounces off your fingertips and you failed to make like a high-end catch, or you're trying to peel away from tight coverage and you don't really have the physicality to run through it, or the route running prowess to get through it. It was just an incredibly inconsistent week that led to a lot of losses in terms of the one-on-one reps, because it was either he was right in position but couldn't come down with the catch, whether, it could have been like not getting your feet in on the sideline. Like, I think he had one of his best routes of the week. He just didn't get his second foot down, and it got waved off incomplete. And it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense why you weren't producing. And it's frustrating because, like, he's got the size. I think he has the athletic tools. He has a pretty good release, and, like, when he was able to be in space, he had decent routes, but it just did not come together for Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. And he might be a guy that ends up going, like, undrafted because he doesn't have a lot of production and just didn't have a good week. And then the last wide receiver here, before I take a short break and try to get my voice back, is Aeneas Smith, the kind of gadget wide receiver out of Texas A&M. Really just a punt return specialist as he heads into the NFL. And honestly, like, he just looks slow. In his routes, he really was not separating. Extremely undersized. And I don't know that he can be much more than like a gadget type. Give him a jet sweep or, throw him a screen. Because he's very shifty, and his vision and creativity after the catch are excellent. But in terms of his ability to separate and like line up at wide receiver and win, I was skeptical of that coming into the week, and certainly didn't show in the one-on-ones at the Senior Bowl. So he's the last wide receiver here we have to talk about. I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll come back. I have a couple notes on the tight ends, and then we'll get into the corners. So there was really two tight ends that caught my attention this week, and just one running back that caught my attention. Again, you can only have your eyes on so many things throughout this week. And I talked about earlier why, especially with the running backs, there's only so much you can take away this week. But one of the teams on the third day did something really cool where they were doing side-by-side one-on-ones, the wide receivers and the corners, side-by-side with running backs, tight ends, and safeties. So did get to see some of these tight ends in the one-on-ones. And just throughout the week, they'll mix these guys in as well. But two tight ends stood out this week. It's not the best tight end class, but two guys stood out. Number one is Ben Sinnott, who is Kansas State, I believe. I'm double checking. Yes, Kansas State, 6'4", 245. So like average size on paper, but looks really thick. And maybe that's just because he's out here next to Jaheim Bell, who's extremely undersized at 6'2", 239. But anyway, he plays big. Ben Sinnott made some really firm hands catches with outstretched arms and showed some pretty good routes for at least someone that comes off as a, let's just say, a full-size tight end. But he had some wiggle, he had some deception, was getting open down in the red zone. So I thought Ben Sinnott had a good week. And then Jaheim Bell as well. I have a good vibe with Jaheim Bell. He's definitely not perfect. He is essentially useless as a blocker based on what I've seen on film. But I did think, and he's one of these guys that I have actually finished my evaluation on him before the Senior Bowl, which there's only 30, 35 players that have fully watched the tape on these guys at this point in the scouting process. But Jaheim Bell is one of them, and because I did that whole Florida State offense, and he's not a perfect player. I had questions coming into this week about his overall route running for a guy that is an undersized tight end, but he's just a very natural receiver. He doesn't fight the ball. He's got strong hands. He's one of these, just a football player. Like, you put the ball in his hands. He's creative as a ball carrier, makes really nice catches, good body control. And I think that was all on display this week. But I also thought his routes showed a little bit more than I expected. A little bit of wiggle. He had a really unique step in his routes. I guess you could describe it as a karaoke step or a karaoke step. You know, the warm up that a lot of teams do in football, where you're putting one foot behind the other and crossing your legs, moving laterally. He did that a couple times where he would go up into his route and cross his legs and like tap one foot behind the other, which you would think would be wasted movement and wouldn't be very effective because it's difficult to break out of that, but it worked for him. So that was interesting, but he definitely created some separation in his routes, and I do think Jaheim Bell had a good week as well. And then the only running back that really stood out for me that caught my attention, again, I'm not saying other running backs didn't have good weeks, it's just from what caught my eye. The main running back that caught my eye was Michael Wiley, the running back out of Arizona on day 3, and it was in the receiving drills. It was with his route running, it was with his hands and his body control on a really nice back shoulder touchdown catch. And definitely looked the part. And he's a full-size back. He's 6 foot 210, so definitely someone to keep an eye on as I'm watching him. His receiving chops were pretty good, so I wanted to give him a shout out. He caught my eye. But let's talk about these cornerbacks. And this was a really good week for these cornerbacks, man. This is as good of a cornerback room as I remember at the Senior Bowl. And, you know, they were really challenging these wide receivers in a way that doesn't happen every year at this event. And, you know, these one-on-ones are built for these wide receivers to win because these corners don't have inside help. They don't have help over the top. It's just them on an island. Oftentimes they're asked to do it from off coverage. They are set up to lose. So if you even win a third or 40% of your reps down here in Mobile, that's really impressive. But 2 cornerbacks had incredible weeks. And number one, I'm sure you've heard people talking him up, Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. And it's funny because I put him in the first round of my mock draft to the Houston Texans, and I described him as a player that played mostly off zone at Toledo and is going to have to kind of learn how to play press man, or at least adapt to doing it. And Houston Texans fans were saying in the comments for that mock draft, they're like, we don't want some raw corner that can't play man coverage. And yeah, so much for that. Quinion Mitchell, you know, it's true. He played mostly off zone at Toledo, but he can play press man. He can play it at a very high level. Was just cool, calm, collected, and fast all week. And it was the whole picture. I mean, you talk about the length, he's got it. He's north of 6 feet. He's got solid arm length, checks the boxes there. The speed, very much there. He's expected to run in the 4.3s, and it showed. His recovery was excellent. He was able to, I think because he knows his recovery speed is so good, he's able to play so controlled and in position. He showed that he can cover with his head turned man-to-man, but read the body language of the receiver and know when to get his head around. He made multiple plays on the ball. He had a wonderful interception where he showed off that recovery speed. He's got the foot speed. And we talk a lot about route squeeze, where it's like that elastic band analogy, where when the receiver starts to stretch his separation, how quickly can you snap that space back together? He's got that. I just don't know what's not to like about Quinion Mitchell. To me, he screams easy top 20 pick, because for a guy that was such a great, productive zone corner, to really, I mean, he won. I said it's impressive if you win 40% of your reps as a corner. To put it lightly, he won more than he lost, and I would bet he was closer to winning 80% of his reps. It was really impressive what he did across the board. So he went from likely / potential first round pick to, I think, lock first round pick, unless he runs slower than expected or something. And then the other guy that I really haven't heard a ton of people gassing up that I think had, honestly, as good of a week as Quinyon Mitchell. Now, he's not going to go as high as Quinyon Mitchell. And he's not as, I don't know that he's as physically gifted. This is Jarvis Brownlee Jr. we're talking about here, out of Louisville. Had one of the best weeks I can remember for a corner at the Senior Bowl. He was feisty for a smaller corner at 5'10.5", 183 pounds. He's a smaller guy. But he did not back down from pressing these wide receivers and staying in their hip pocket, playing physical throughout the route. But what was most impressive to me about Jarvis Brownlee Jr. was he twice he anticipated a route break and jumped the route before the receiver even began his break. And I don't think he ended up converting either of them for interceptions. I think he dropped them and wasn't, they weren't thrown like right to him or whatever. But you do that once and you say that's impressive, but he was probably guessing. But you do that twice throughout the week and it's not like he was ever guessing and ending up way out of position either. Like to me, he's physical and incredibly high IQ to be able to do that. I mean, I really can't put it into words how confident and how well you have to see it to jump these routes at the Senior Bowl like that, man to man. So that was really impressive. He also was getting targeted deep and was really good at getting his head around and finding the football, whereas a lot of these guys are just flailing or grabbing. Not Brownlee. He was confident and collected to find the ball, get his head around. Really, really looked the part. So I thought he had a huge week, and I think he went from a day 3 guy to someone that has a chance to get himself into the day 2 conversation. Then we have corners who had just good weeks. Again, probably guys that won about 30 to 40% of their snaps, their one-on-one snaps, which is, again, impressive for these corners. Chris Abrams-Drain, smaller corner out of Missouri. I mean, the lateral agility and acceleration and change of direction is no question with him. He is a guy that, wouldn't be surprised if his shuttle time and his 3-cone times, if he runs it, would be through the roof. And you can tell when he sees it and when he jumps on something, he can close that space in a hurry. Wasn't always shut down in coverage. Did get out physical at times. I think he only measured in at, is he 170? Am I making that up? Yeah, 5'11", 173. So you better be lightning quick at that size. But he confirmed that. So I thought he had some good reps. And then Andrew Phillips, the cornerback out of Kentucky, very physical week. And sometimes to a fault where he was overly grabby. But I thought his speed looked all right. No one was really able to stack him vertically speaking. And there was actually a rep in team where it's, I don't have a ton of notes from team drills just because there's so much going on. But sometimes you pick up these notes from team, the 11-on-11 drills, where he was in the slot and he was running it was cover 3. He had the curl flat and he did a really good job of reading out the route concepts and then getting his head around to take away the dig behind him. And I love zone defenders that cover players and not grass. And those that have been around the channel know that's a thing I love. But I think it does show really good confidence and high IQ as a zone defender to be able to do that. But yeah, he did draw a couple flags for being too grabby, but was really tough. He was the only corner that won a rep against Ladd McConkey. got in his face, bodied him at the line of scrimmage, and just didn't allow him to use that route running against him. So there's a lot to like in Andrew Phillips. Could be, with that physicality and those zone eyes, assuming his tape checks out as a run defender, he could be a really good like slot corner with that skill set. Not saying he can't play outside, because again, his speed and ability to stop guys from stacking him looked pretty solid too, but that might be where he's best, is in the slot. That was Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. And then the last guy I have as having a good week was DJ James, who, very similar analysis to Chris Abrams-Drain, where he's undersized, 5'11 and a half, but 170 pounds. He's almost like Emmanuel Forbes size, not quite as tall, not quite as light, but lightning quick feet. And in terms of like off coverage, snapping onto guys' routes, and just being sticky at times, I thought DJ James, the cornerback from Auburn, showed a lot of traits to like there. It did get grabby at times when he found himself out of position, got a little too grabby. It's a lot of these guys. Certainly was not perfect, but he definitely stood out to me with his speed and quickness. Then we have players that had solid weeks where I think they probably helped their stock a little bit. Cam Hart out of Notre Dame. Honestly, I think he ended up winning more reps than he ended up losing. So obviously that's impressive. But to me, he was really grabby. Probably could have been flagged a lot more than he ended up getting flagged throughout the week. And honestly, when he got into his back pedal, and keep in mind, he's 6'2", 200 pounds. So he's a bigger corner when you're comparing him to guys like DJ James and Chris Abrams-Drain. This is going to stand out to you, but it did feel like a little bit too stiff, a little bit too unbalanced from Cam Hart when he would get into his back pedals. I felt like his hips were tight, kind of struggled to turn, and then he would get grabby at times. So, he had a solid week in terms of he won a lot of reps, but I'm still not sold on him. I think he played it well with all of the grabbiness that he had, but still probably helped his stock, just because, like I said, if you're winning 50% of your reps this week, people are gonna take note of that. Johnny Dixon, the cornerback out of Penn State, I thought was solid. I don't think he played on day 3, so a little bit smaller look on him. Honestly, I didn't have a ton of notes in terms of like what stood out about his skill set. He's kind of seems like kind of a balanced corner. They've got him listed at 5'11", 192, so that makes sense. But definitely was solid. Receivers were not taking advantage of him in the way that they were his Penn State counterpart, Kalen King, that we'll talk about momentarily. But yeah, Johnny Dixon had a solid week, along with Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon. The nice thing about Kyrie Jackson is I watched the reps, and he didn't look super athletic, but I was surprised to see that he's 6'3", 203 pounds. Like, I thought he moved pretty well, and then when I saw that height and weight, I was like, oh, he moves really well at that size. So that stood out. A little bit over physical at times. Definitely didn't win every rep, but definitely had a solid week. That was Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon. And then Max Melton had a very solid week as well. The cornerback out of Rutgers, very like quick and scrappy guy, was just getting in guys' hip pockets. Kind of coverage-wise reminded me of what we talked about with Jarvis Brownlee, where you look at Max Melton listed at 5'11", 193. It's fine size, but he's not like a big corner by any means. But he's got 32-inch arms, which is above average for a corner, and was just pretty sticky. I think you can make a case that Max Melton belonged in the other group, but didn't really necessarily have like dominant reps throughout the week. The other nice thing about Max Melton is he reached the top speed of the week, 21.17 miles per hour, which isn't crazy speed, but is very high-end speed. So just like his brother, Bo Melton was a really fast player. Max Melton's got some speed in there too. So he definitely had a solid to good week. And then there's 4 names here that I'm just going to say like didn't stand out as much. Much more snap in, snap out. And actually I have to take that back. Max Melton was second in top speed because Carlton Johnson out of Fresno State actually hit 22.17. Max Melton was just below that, I believe, when all was said and done. That might have been like the day 2, like as of day 2, Max Melton might have had the top speed, and then Carlton Johnson got it. But both those guys, Carlton Johnson and Max Melton, had some good long speed this week. But anyway, yeah, we'll start there, I guess. Carlton Johnson out of Fresno State, just not super consistent. Didn't stand out a ton. He's a 6-year player out of Fresno State. He's 5'10 and a half, 169 pounds. Then we got Elijah Jones out of Boston College. Both those guys, Carlton Johnson, Elijah Jones, along with Chow Smith Wade here out of Oregon State. I think all these guys are more like on the fringe of getting drafted, and they certainly felt like you could beat them. I don't think they had like horrible weeks, but they certainly, I don't think, helped or really hurt their stock. And then the other guy in this group is Jeremiah Pritchett out of Auburn, who is, I think, ranked a little bit higher than Smith Wade, than Johnson and Elijah Jones in terms of like projected draft position. But another guy that was just very up and down throughout the week. I thought his best tape was on day 3 down in the red zone, where he could kind of use his size a little bit more to his advantage. I suppose he's 6 foot, 31-inch arms. So, guys trying to run fades and less space to operate. He looked a little bit more comfortable, but yeah, those guys just didn't really stand out to me too much. And then I have 2 corners that had really bad weeks. One guy, you're not going to slam him for it because it's Willie Drew out of Virginia State. Not all of these small school guys come in, and unfortunately, not all of them can hang against top-level competition. We talked about the receiver earlier who held up. Willie Drew comes in, and I had to look up who this was because I had never seen that helmet in my life, Virginia State helmet. And honestly, I don't know that he won a rep all week, maybe 1 or 2, but he had a really rough week from the very get-go. So he's going to have to turn this around if he wants to get himself drafted. And then Kalen King, actually, who was like a top 50 player kind of heading into the week, someone that's been flirted as, maybe an early second-round guy. Man, I don't know that that's going to happen for Kalen King. He's had a really rough senior season, actually junior season. He's declaring as a true junior, or at least a year 3 player. And a lot of people felt like he was the better corner out of him and Joey Porter Jr. last year, but was not nearly as good this year. And he honestly had, other than Willie Drew out of Virginia State, who we just talked about, Kalen King couldn't cover anything this week. Slow feet, slow reactionary route squeeze. Long speed looked questionable. Couldn't really find the ball. Really no press coverage to speak of. Just, man, really rough week for Kalen King. Will be an interesting watch. And he's a guy that I will probably have to go back to his 2022 tape and see if there's a notable difference in what's going on there. Because his fall has been dramatic and really a bad week from Kalen King. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and then we'll wrap up with O-line and D-line. And now it's time for the podcast that is for the real draft junkies, the offensive line. And I'm a sucker for these one-on-one drills, man. Maybe it's because I played O-line in high school. Maybe it's just because of the competitiveness. And, this is really where you see, every year it feels like there's guys getting into a fight in these drills. This year was no different. Jefferson from LSU was ripping off a guy's helmet. But, these guys are here to compete, and they bring it every single year. And this was a really fun offensive line draft class. This looks like one of the deeper O-line classes, at least at the Senior Bowl. But there's a lot of guys that weren't here as well that are even higher than these players. So I think it's Mike Renner thinks that there will be a record number of offensive tackles taken this year in the first round at 8. And I could see it after some of the weeks these guys had. So again, we're going to go through this kind of by big risers, good weeks, solid weeks, so-so weeks, so on and so forth. Our big risers this week on the offensive line, I mean, you got to start with Jackson Powers Johnson. Was the talk of the week. I think by consensus, it was either Quinyon Mitchell or Jackson Powers Johnson had the best week of one-on-ones down there. And I really think Powers Johnson got himself into the first round. I think he has pushed himself in terms of grades. At this point in time, I think he's likely to receive a higher grade than I had on Creed Humphrey, on John Michael Schmitz. Linderbaum, probably not. But that is the type of territory that JPJ has entered in terms of like high-end draft prospects. As a center or a guard, he was taking a bunch of snaps at guard and held up there as well. I mean, honestly, he's the complete package. He is 6'3"? 6'3", 334. Arms are a little bit shorter, 32 and a quarter inch, but as an interior, that's fine. But he's got a great anchor. He can move people in the run game. But a lot of guys at 334 just can't really move. There's a lot of guys that we're going to talk about here today that are his size that just, they don't have the lateral footwork to, move side to side with these kind of quicker pass rushers. And he was doing that all week. He didn't lose at all against any sort of like finesse pass rush. I had him with only one loss that was not even a full loss, but he actually got bull rushed back pretty far from one of our other big winners this week, and that is Michael Hall out of Ohio State. But man, that's a hell of a week. The offensive line is supposed to be at a disadvantage in these drills because, for one, you don't have double teams, which JPJ is going to have a lot of double teams in the NFL because he's going to be an interior player, but even more so, like you're watching these drills, and especially for like the guards and centers, some of these pass rushers are taking these reps like 2 or 3 yards left or right. And it's like, well, that's cool that you showed that. But in a real game, if you try that, you're just going to run into the pass rusher and the offensive lineman next to you. Whereas in a one-on-one drill, it's like, yeah, sure, if you want to take a guy that's 330 pounds and run around him, like that's why they're not a tackle, right? So, the offensive linemen, especially the interior guys, are often at a disadvantage. And there were no finesse losses from JPJ. Like he was able to redirect and stay in front of these guys. He had a rep where I think it was the Clemson pass rusher tried to do that and get way wide. And even if his feet were like maybe a step behind, which again is fine, he's not going to find himself in this position too often in the NFL where he has to step and hitch over like 3 steps. But even then, just getting his offhand on the guy, he had him in a complete vice grip and like redirected him. So he's got the core strength, the arm strength. He's got hammers for hands. I mean, this guy's awesome. So JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, had a huge week. And then Christian Jones, the offensive tackle out of Texas, who I don't even know where he was projected to go, honestly. But I think he is going to rise. Like, let's actually look at the sort of like consensus board, so to speak. So they had him as a 4th round or so guy. I mean, you stack him right up, in my opinion, with Jordan Morgan and Kingsley Suamata, Patrick Paul. I think Christian Jones got himself at least into day 2. If he was a 4th round guy, he just looked the part, man. Really, his main loss came on like his first rep of the week where they tried him at guard, and he stopped his feet and got beat inside. But then he kicked out to tackle and had 4 straight dominant reps. So when I'm taking notes, sometimes a guy wins with anchor, or he wins with good hand placement, or he wins with good feet. And I'll note like win, most notable, whatever he did it with. Christian Jones had 4 straight reps where the whole package came together. Technique, arm usage, anchor was all there. Now on day 2, he showed some weaknesses. I think he definitely, like a lot of these guys, just needs to work on those inside counters and stepping inside a little bit better. He lost 2 reps on inside counters where the pass rushers fake to the outside and were able to get him on the inside. So the nice thing is he showed to me the foot speed. It's just a technique thing and a coachable thing. And then he did get destroyed on 1 rep on day 2 by a bull rush against Eric Watts, who's a bigger edge guy. But he didn't protect his chest, and he lost a rep. So it was not a perfect week. But then day 3, Christian Jones was right back to being locked down. So he had a really good week. Again, I think he got himself into day 2. Just minor improvements to make, and I think looks like a very complete tackle prospect. And then my last big riser here for the offensive lineman is Bo Limmer, the center/interior player for Arkansas. And he was the one that got just bent ass backwards by Tavondre Sweat, who's like 375 pounds and was destroying people all week. So, he got kind of turned into a poster on 1 rep. But, man, he was really solid all week. Good footwork, really good hands. And, he is a little bit undersized. He's only 301 pounds, which is like a very normal playing weight for an offensive center in the NFL. But that's a unique matchup going against this freaky bull rush guy that's going to need to be double teamed a lot in the NFL. And this is a one-on-one drill. So I don't even really hold that against him. In fact, there was a lot of other reps where he held his own against Tavondre Sweat. So I thought Bo Limmer had an excellent week. And, I mean, let's just keep doing this. He was a projected 4th or 5th round guy. I mean, I think a lot of centers have had worse weeks and gone 3rd or 4th round from their performance at the Senior Bowl. So I really liked what I saw there. Excited to get into his film. Arkansas has been a bit of a center factory lately, so he might be next in line there. Then we've got the offensive lineman that had good weeks, certainly. Dominique Puny, which is a really ironic name for an offensive lineman, but he's out of Kansas, and he was a guy that played mostly tackle at Kansas, but they had him working at center, at guard. He took a couple reps at tackle, but he was funny because he got kind of embarrassed on his very first rep going against Hall, the Baylor D tackle, where he overset and Hall beat him with a swim move and just was a really ugly loss. But he settled in literally after that first rep and was really solid. He's got really quick feet. You can tell he was a tackle, just ability to kind of latch and mirror. But I thought his play strength looked pretty solid from the interior. So Dominique Puny out of Kansas, I think for a guy that you're like, okay, is he going to make the transition to interior at the next level? Looks very promising. Sateo Leamia. You guys will have to let me know if I got that pronunciation right. Out of Utah, again, thought he had a very clean week. He kicked in a guard, but he's someone that has tackle guard flexibility and just, quick feet, strong hands, did not lose a lot throughout the week, and certainly I think helped himself just with how solid he looked. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have like the fastest feet, and in terms of like his ability to play tackle at the next level and get a bunch of depth in his kick slides, like I don't know that he's got a super high upside, but I do think as a guard, I mean, he showed he's feisty, can latch and mirror, and has the right play strength. So I thought he had a really good week. Kingsley Sumatea, the tackle out of BYU, who has been put in first-round mock drafts. I do wonder if he might be better as a guard, because he had kind of a polarizing week. Certainly won more reps than he lost, which you would expect to see from a potential, top 35, top 50 pick. But one thing was very clear is that if you tried to bull rush this guy, even when he didn't win with his hands first, because that's the best way to prevent losing on a bull rush, is to strike the outside shoulder, win hands inside quickly, protect your hand, protect your chest. But even a couple times when guys would get into his chest first, his core strength and his raw anchor was insane. Like multiple times players would have the get off, win early, stick him in the chest, and he went nowhere. And that's really impressive. Like Christian Jones, we talked about having a great week. He gave up his chest on a rep and lost bad. So for me, I think the core strength, the anchor is excellent, but he did really, I don't want to say he struggled with his feet, but his technique with his feet clearly are not where they need to be for him to be a tackle. He multiple times was slow to react to the inside when guys were trying to hit him on inside counters, and he would lose some reps giving up those inside counters. And I also didn't see like a super explosive kick slide from him either. So he's not the widest offensive lineman. He's 6'4", 329. He does have 34-inch arms, so he certainly could play tackle. But I do wonder if he might be one of these guys that he could be a great guard, but maybe just a good tackle. But anyway, I did think he had a good week. Just because to see that anchor, to see guys hit him in the chest and him go nowhere is crazy. And then two guys that have been flirted into the first round. One is almost assuredly going in the first round. One is kind of like a top 40 projected guy. Talise Fuaga and Jordan Morgan. Fuaga, I think, looked the part. I think no one is going to say Fuaga looks like an elite pass protecting tackle prospect, but certainly has the right traits to be solid at it. He is, I'm not going to say he's more known for his ability as a run blocker, but, like his feet didn't look exceptional at tackle, but I think they certainly looked good enough, and he definitely won more reps than he lost. That was Talise Fuaga. And then Jordan Morgan definitely looked the part as well, the Arizona tackle. Just kind of checks a lot of boxes, didn't lose a lot of reps, and I didn't have any like crazy notes on him, but he was just very consistent all week. So if he's a guy that's got hype as like a top 40 pick, I definitely don't think he cost himself any of that here in Mobile. And then the other guy that had a good week was Roger Rosengarten, the other tackle from Washington. So Troy Fontenot didn't come for the event this week. Roger Rosengarten did, and Rosengarten looked really polished, man. I thought he showed about as good of depth as any of the tackles here in their kick slides, just the technique and the explosiveness out of his stance. Does he have good arm length? Not so much. Only 33-inch arms, but really did a good job still of protecting that outside shoulder. And that still clears the threshold, 33 and 1/4 inch arms. So I think he can certainly play tackle. I do think looked like one of the more technically polished tackles on the week. The only note I had from his film was I questioned his play strength a little bit, and none of these rushers really tested him with power, which I would have liked to see. A lot of guys were just trying to win to the edge or win with inside counters, and I think he's really going to be able to handle that. But definitely wish we got to see how he can anchor and handle power a little bit better this week. But overall, good week. Then we have some more guys that I definitely think had solid weeks. Charles Turner, the center out of LSU, was showing off a snatch trap technique, which I always love guys that do that. That's when you get guys coming in kind of leaning a little bit, and then you're able to just, snare them basically and get them to the ground. And that takes a lot of awareness and the right technique and just kind of, it's almost like having a pass rush move for an offensive lineman. Like a lot of these guys, especially here at the Senior Bowl, are just, they're doing the basic set, stick your hands, like pretty base level technique. But when you see a guy, going against these interior rushers and he's able to plant them on the ground, I think it shows a level of technique that's really impressive. Definitely showed good anchor, good feet. They put him at guard and center, and he held up. Did have some losses, but he won a lot more than he lost. So Charles Turner, the interior offensive lineman out of LSU, had a good week. Christian Haynes, almost an identical level of week. Two guys that interior offensive linemen, took some snaps at center. You can see the tools. He's got the anchor. He's even bigger, I think, than Charles Turner. Has a little bit more strength. But yeah, Christian Haynes definitely got better as the week went on and had a very solid week. I think he'll get drafted relatively high. I've seen as early as second round. I don't know if I haven't watched his full film yet. I don't know if I'm quite there on him, but definitely a guy that's getting a lot of hype from this week, and I would say deservedly so. He didn't have a ton of losses, but there were some times where his feet were lagging behind, and he was struggling with some of these quicker pass rushers. And then Javon Foster, the offensive tackle out of Missouri, he totally caught my eye on day one. I thought he had a near flawless first day. Started to pick up some losses as the week went on. One thing I noticed was he was almost like setting a little bit too deep, playing it a little bit safe in a way, where you would watch the rep and be like, okay, he got his hands on him. He didn't give up a ton of ground necessarily, but he set so deep that by the end of the rep, the pocket had collapsed on him. So that stood out with him on me. I think his play strength might be lacking a little bit. Like some of the more powerful rushers definitely did drive him back a little bit, but probably the best tackle that I saw this week at consistently striking that outside shoulder and winning with his hands early. I thought his foot speed looked pretty good, and he passed the eye test to me. And then Delmar Glaze out of Maryland, he got better as the week went on. Day two, he had some really impressive, just dominant reps showing anchor and quick feet. And he's a guy that's he's played left tackle, he's played right tackle in college. They stuck him at guard a lot of the times in these drills. He's 6'4", 323, 34.5-inch arms. So teams like the Packers, for example, that love taking these guys that have positional flexibility are going to love Delmar Glaze. And, spending even a late third-round pick or a fourth-round pick on a guy that can be that, like, sixth man of the year for your offensive line, where if one guy goes down, you can take a Delmar Glaze and stick him in at any of the spots, maybe other than center. But even then, maybe you could learn center. That's super valuable because once you start shuffling your offensive line, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So I think teams will really like his flexibility and his competitiveness throughout the week. Kingsley Eguakin, center out of Florida, had a really solid week. Was a little unbalanced, would find himself getting turned a lot, and I think technique-wise, there's a lot to clean up there, but really a scrappy guy, really powerful punches. He got guys on the ground a bunch throughout the week. So he had some really fun wins. That just, probably someone that is going to need a little bit more time to kind of stay square and win a little bit more consistently, but I think he showed some tools, some quickness, and some strong hands. And then the last guy that had a solid week, again, really good week from these offensive linemen. Probably the best O-line group I've ever seen at the Senior Bowl. Travis Glover out of Georgia State. This dude came in the middle of day 2. Was a late call up. They had to sub him in for, I don't know, someone got hurt or whatever. And he showed up. He only got 2 reps on day 2, but was kicking ass in his 2 reps that he got. I think he had a pancake on 1 and then just showed an outstanding firm hands and anchor on the 2nd. And, day 3 wasn't quite as good. I think day 3 you could see a little bit more of his bad technique, where it doesn't sound like, I would bet Georgia State doesn't have the best O-line coaches in the world. There's hardly 32 good offensive line coaches in the league, let alone Georgia State. And when he got to day 3, he's getting into his slides where he's setting, just kind of sticking his arms out there and just kind of rocking backwards. It's like, all right, you don't necessarily want to just stick your arms out there and coast backwards. So he's 25 years old and is a developmental 25-year-old prospect. But for a guy that was not originally invited to show up and flash some tools, how can you not love that and root for the guy out of Georgia State? Now, not everybody had a great week among these offensive linemen. 2 guys that are getting a lot of talk as potential first-round guys, I actually didn't think had the best weeks, and that was both Tyler Guyton and Patrick Paul. So let's start with Tyler Guyton, who people are talking about as like a first-round lock, and this is where you go back to what I said at the start of the show, where the 3 things that matter the most are the weigh-ins, the way these guys interact with the coaches, and the actual one-on-ones. And you look at Tyler Guyton showing up at 6'7", 328, 34.25-inch arms. He can move as well as any offensive lineman in attendance, maybe any offensive lineman in this class. He is a freak athlete and was super competitive throughout the week. The way he was interacting with coaches and, fist bumping his teammates and all that, like he wants it. But if you're just evaluating the one-on-ones, he was certainly not one of the better offensive tackles. He had a lot of ugly losses where sometimes to me, it's unfortunate because there's not like one thing with Tyler Guyton that needs to be worked on. Like you would say with a lot of these guys. With Guyton, it was like some reps he's not protecting his chest. Some reps his feet look really clunky and discombobulated. Some reps he's not stepping in to cut off inside counters. Like I said, he flashed some insane tools. He had some, like when everything clicked and he got in position and he got his strikes in, you can see why the hype is there. And I'm not even necessarily saying he shouldn't go in the first round, because it's a trait, a lot of this is a traits-based evaluation, and he's younger, and you hope things can come along. But saying he got himself into the first round, I do not think was because of his tape this week. And then likewise with Patrick Paul, offensive tackle out of Houston, crazy length. This dude is 6'7". He's 333 pounds, 36.25-inch arms. The traits from him are unbelievable. Now, I don't think he's as good of an athlete as Tyler Guyton. He is, let's see, is he older? He's got 1 more year of experience. And the film was probably even worse. I thought Patrick Paul was consistently basically trying to bear hug with his hands. Just was not striking inside and was losing against power, which is unfortunate at his size with that length. You want to be able to show an anchor and protect your chest, and I just don't think he did that. I was not impressed by Patrick Paul's tape. I would be a little bit more surprised if he went in the first round, which I have seen some first round hype on him. And I don't know that I'm going to get there on him. I'll watch his film, and maybe that changes, of course. A lot of these guys, it's my first look. But I certainly did not see a first-round tackle, even physically, but also on tape in Patrick Paul. We got some more guys to talk about here. I think I'm going to run through these guys a little bit quicker. More up and down weeks, less notes, guys that lost a few more reps than you'd like. Brandon Coleman out of TCU. I thought his feet looked pretty slow. His balance was a question mark. Clearly a guy that I'll be kicking into guard on my draft board. He's played some tackle at TCU. I do not think he's got the foot speed to be a tackle. Javion Cohen out of Miami. I thought had some really ugly reps. The feet, again, got exposed this week, but has good hands and a good anchor, so I don't want to slam the guy, but certainly didn't have a huge week. Tanner Bortolini out of Wisconsin had a really bad first day, and then settled in and was better after that. I didn't see a ton of standout traits from him. Trevor Keegan out of Michigan I thought was really up and down all week. And then Isaiah Adams out of Illinois I thought was really up and down all week too. And he's a guy that is up there in like the third round right now. And I don't know about that one. And then 3 more offensive linemen that had really bad weeks here before I take another break and wrap up with the interior D-line, or just the D-line in general. But Andrew Rame, interior offensive lineman / center out of Oklahoma, he lost a lot of reps, man. He had a rough week, really every day. I think the play strength is really not there. He only has 31 3/4 inch arms, so shorter arms, kind of struggled to just latch and redirect and mirror. He's got a really slender lower half, so I'm worried about his anchor. He to me really felt like the worst center in attendance, kind of by a country mile, honestly. I thought the rest of the centers had solid to great weeks. Him, not so much. Then Layden Robinson out of Texas A&M, just really bad feet, a lot of losses. The D linemen from that group had the most success getting to go against Rame and Layden Robinson out of Texas A&M. And then Ethan Driscoll out of Marshall. He's the perfect example of why you want to be careful with 6'8" offensive tackles. It's not always an advantage if guys can't arch their back and play with good hands to protect their chest. With Ethan Driscoll, he was way too upright, was way out of balance, and guys were just running around him, running through him. It was a really rough... Gosh, we're dying here. It was a really rough week for Ethan Driscoll. Probably not going to get drafted based on the week he had here. But, yeah, I'm going to go get some water, and we'll wrap up with the D lineman here. Okay, defensive line. And I think we should take what I said about the offensive line being so great this week, take it with a minor grain of salt, because this might be the worst D-line group that I've ever seen down here. Just not a lot of guys that I see as high draft pick types, and a lot of guys that I watched throughout the week, and I'm like, is this even a draftable player? So we're going to have a lot of guys that just did not have good weeks here as we talk about them. But that doesn't mean there were not any really good players down here who had big weeks. So let's start with the positive, the big risers this week. T'Vondre Sweat out of Texas. My Lord, this dude is fun. He skipped the weigh-ins, even though at Texas he's listed at 360 pounds. So he's a nose tackle. And skipping the weigh-ins would seem to indicate that he's more than 360 pounds, which is terrifying when you turn on the tape and see him really move the way he did. Not that he is lightning quick or anything, but man, he can scoot a little bit for such a big player. And he had a bunch of pass rush wins. He was really unfair when he went to power. But what I respect about his week was he showed off the power and showed, look, you can't leave me one-on-one. There's a pretty good chance I'm going to run right through even a good offensive center like Limmer. And that was great to see because he's got get-off. He's got hands and can push the pocket. But he went to some other stuff, right? He had a swim move and went side to side a little bit. Now, it wasn't always perfect, but he's someone that I'm really excited to get into the film and evaluate his run defense. You know, Big 12 football isn't exactly known for the most physical run defenders. You know, is this another, who's the Baylor? Siaki Ika, who seemed indifferent against the run despite being 350 pounds. You know, it is what it is, but the Big 12 is going to have that stigma. So I'm very curious to see if I like his run defense film, because this was more focused on what he can do as a pass rusher. But there's a lot to work with there. And as long as he's not a problem as a run defender, I mean, he to me should go at least second round, just because this is a skill set that's really hard to find with a guy this big that could move like that. So really good week for him. And then Michael Hall was the other guy that I thought had a huge week. Comes out as a true junior out of Ohio State. And, I mean, he was just lightning quick. Probably not someone that's going to be much of a run defender. And like I said earlier, these drills are going to favor a guy like Michael Hall. But for him to be as dominant as he was, you know, there's a lot of guys that weren't as dominant as Michael Hall was, right? So he had a really good week, just multiple times showed incredible lateral agility. The get-off is exceptional. He's able to get leverage too, though, and we talked about this earlier with JPJ. He was one of the few. He was the only guy that won a rep against JPJ, and it was with power against a 323 guy. And you know, force equals mass times acceleration, and when you have great acceleration like Michael Hall has, even if he's quote unquote only 280 pounds, you can push back some really good anchors on the O-line. So Michael Hall definitely helped his stock. People will certainly like his skill set in the draft. But then we have the guys that had good weeks, and I think a lot of people will be surprised that I don't have Darius Robinson in there with the big risers from this week, because the hype on him has been astronomical. He was someone that most saw as maybe a third round type of guy, late third maybe, coming into the week. A tweener type that played a lot of defensive tackle for Missouri, kind of switching to edge here at the Senior Bowl. And, you know, the traits are undeniable. He's 6'5", 286, 34 3/4-inch arms. He's big. He's got get off. He's got quickness. I understand why people are looking at this physical profile and saying, you know, as much as first round, that much I don't really understand, though. Like, I get why they're saying he had a good week. He had some really impressive swim move wins at his size, where he's showing that really nice combination of the length to strike, push, pull, to swim, pair that with the quickness to get around guys. Like, there's definitely stuff to like about Darius Robinson, but I mean, he lost a lot of reps. I'm not going to sit here and say he had some astronomical week and looked like a dominant guy that pushed himself up into the first round. Like, this isn't what Jermaine Johnson did at the Senior Bowl, for example, where Jermaine Johnson was an ass kicker like every single day. Darius Robinson was pretty good. And Jermaine Johnson was viewed higher coming in too. So, I think he had a good week. I see why people are excited about the traits, but I'm going to push back for now on any sort of first round hype. And I also think he's getting overinflated a little bit because of really how bad this group was this week. And you have a guy that had a good week and he's got these traits. Maybe we're overreacting to just how high of a draft pick he's worth here. Another guy that had a really good week was Baylor defensive tackle Gabe Hall. Now, him I'm a little bit skeptical of because of what we talked about earlier, where these one-on-ones favor especially the interior D lineman, because basically Gabe Hall was able to basically flash into one gap and then swim into another gap with lightning quickness. And I like the quickness. I like the finesse in his swim move. but he was going so wide with these moves that I wonder if what he was doing was going to run into guys next to him in an actual 5-man protection set. But again, still a very good week. Showed a ton of quickness and won an impressive amount of reps for the interior. So another guy I'm excited to dive into the film and see what he was able to do in actual 5-man sets. Were these swim moves working in a real game, basically? Or was this specifically something he was able to take advantage of in this drill? And then the other guy that really stood out to me is Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. And honestly, I thought Kneeland, who's also big, and he was also taking some snaps inside. He's 6'3", 268, 34-inch arms. Like, he's not quite where Darius Robinson was, but I thought Kneeland has plenty of size, and I actually love that he's a little shorter, but he's got those long arms. And he had insane get off. There was a few snaps where he was just getting on dudes in the snap of a finger. He also, to me, showed a little bit more of an ability to counter and win later in the rep than Darius Robinson, who I felt like didn't really have an adjustment and would get locked up a little bit more. Kneeland definitely stood out as a huge traitsy guy that had some really explosive wins. Showed some really nice bend, too, in a way that I wouldn't say Darius Robinson has. All right, then we had some guys that had solid weeks. Certainly lost their share of reps, but had some impressive wins on top of that. Probably didn't help or hurt their stock too much. Cedric Johnson out of Ole Miss had some really impressive reps that popped to me. He's another guy with one of these kind of more compact frames. He's 6'2.5", 268 pounds, 33-inch arms. Kind of that Derek Hall mold where at that size, as long as he has good get off, he's really capable of getting those hands inside and winning with power. And he did. He showed some good power, and he showed some nice lateral quickness and inside counters. So certainly was not perfect all week, but he looked the part to me. Justin Abwagbi, interior defensive lineman out of Alabama. He really got better as the week went on. Had a lot more pass rush wins day 2 and day 3. He had a really nice push and pull move, I think, on day 2. Can't remember who it was against, but just really good technique, really good quickness. Stuck his hands, won the get off, won early, and then showed the strength and quickness. It was a really good move, and he had some good, just a variety of different wins as the week went on. So I thought he was solid. And then McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. Got another guy that got much better as the weeks went on, as the practices went on. Virtually non-existent on day 1, but was just a big ball of energy and brought some reps that were difficult for these offensive linemen to handle. Just good quickness, a lot of power, not a lot of technique, but saw some traits there in McKinley Jackson. Braden Fisk got a lot of discourse this week out of Florida State. And another player like Hall, where he's going to benefit from these wider sets and the increase in space that these guys have to work with in these one-on-ones. But he is lightning quick. I mean, he's got as good of a get-off as you'll find from these interior players. And just, he's played a lot of football and was really, I don't even know if I would say good with his hands. Like, I don't know that he was necessarily technically sound, but very active with his hands. His motor and his hands and his feet never stopped working. He was basically either winning extremely early with the get off and the quickness, which happened a couple times, or he would win late where he just was throwing so much at these guys that maybe 3 seconds into the play he would spin off of them or rip through them or something. Or he was getting tossed. Like, his play strength was very mediocre, arguably the worst out of the guys in attendance here. 6'3", 295, shorter arms at 31 inches. So he's a unique kind of like one gap, just line him up in a gap, let him shoot through it and be disruptive as a role player. I could see like Todd Bowles type of defense where they'll put him in a 4-eye and say, just knife into this gap and be disruptive. We're not really asking you to like stack and shed or drive the pocket or anything. Like I think he's got a unique skill set that certain schemes could tap into. And then honestly, Laiatu Latu had just a solid week. He didn't take a lot of reps, it felt like. I think on day 3 he sat it out, which is fine. I mean, he's supposed to go in the first round. It's just, there's a lot of expectations for this guy. I put him in the solid weeks because I don't know that he hurt his draft stock at all. But I definitely don't know that he like is a riser this week. I think whatever you thought about Laiatu Latu coming into this, that probably hasn't changed. His ability to win late in the rep is really special. Like he has as good of a, I'm sure he's got a great plan of attack in terms of like how he wants to approach each rep, but his ability to on the fly diagnose like the positioning of the offensive tackle, where their hands are, where the leverage is, his ability like on the fly to diagnose like, all right, I need to go to a rip counter, or I need to go to a spin counter, or I can get the bend angle here, or an inside swipe counter. Like he is so technically refined. But I also don't think his like raw athletic ability is really anything all that special. There were some reps where some of these guys kind of bodied him up a little bit. So again, a solid week for Laiatu Latu, but I think he could have come down here and like kicked ass and gotten himself into like the top 10. And I don't know that really happened. Then we're really running out of praise. I have 7 players that had so-so weeks where maybe they flashed a couple wins, but overall, I definitely don't think helped their stock. Chris Braswell, I think you expected more from him. Just didn't really stand out. He had one good power win. I want to say he had a good inside counter win, but for the most part was getting locked up and didn't look too different from some of these other edge guys that are not day 2 types of players. So didn't think Braswell had the best week. Marcus Harris out of Auburn has a lot of quickness. He's kind of a tweener type, 6'2", 284. So I feel like he kind of struggled to figure out how he was going to win in these drills. He had a couple nice quick hitting wins on guards, but not a ton to add on him. Eric Watts out of UConn was very polarizing. He had that dominant bull rush win on the Texas tackle that we talked about earlier. He's a big dude. I think he's an edge. He's 6'5", 277, 35 and 3/4 inch arms. Like he's a big guy, but he's kind of a tweener. And I think that showed up a little bit too, just not super consistent. Austin Booker out of Kansas. I wanted to see more from him. It's not a huge surprise. He's only played 1 year. He's declaring as a true junior. Started his career at Minnesota. Never played. Went to Kansas. And is declaring here, which seems to indicate that they're telling him he's going to be, a decently high draft pick. And he didn't really have much of a plan of attack. You could see the length and the athletic ability, but he definitely confirmed that he's a total project. So it's not a huge surprise, but I think you would have wished to see those physical traits at least get him 1 or 2 more wins. Braden McGregor out of Michigan, not much of a standout week. Dwayne Carter out of Duke, not a whole lot to add on his week. Brandon Dorless out of Oregon. Honestly, just not a lot stood out from those guys. And then I actually have 8 players here that I thought had bad weeks and probably hurt their stock, whatever it might be, from the D-line group. One of which being Jordan Jefferson from LSU, who is one of the 3 or 4 worst weeks I think I've ever seen from a player at the Senior Bowl. Excuse me. I'm thinking back to like Racy McMath. Was brutal in the one-on-ones. Just could not win. Ended up going the 4th round. Jordan Jefferson, not only was he put in a box every single snap, all he was trying to do was just lock guys up and drive them backwards. There was no hand usage or counters or anything. And it's not like his power was all that good. So he was brutal. And then on day 2, he got tired of winning and ripped off the other guy's helmet in frustration and looked like a complete asshat. When Jefferson, I think, was holding on the play. So it was a really bad week for Jordan Jefferson. I got to watch the film, of course, but certainly felt like an undrafted player to me this week. Jaden Krumedi out of Mississippi State felt like he lost most of his reps, showed some traits, but just not a consistent week at all for him. Miles Cole out of Texas Tech. I don't even remember a win for him. I'm sure he did, but he definitely has some length and just was not able to put that to use. Javon Solomon, undersized edge out of Troy. I was excited to see him because he's 6 feet and a half with 33 3/4 inch arms. I was wondering if this was going to be a player that could maybe bull rush some dudes and kind of use that unique compact size to like get up and under guys and show a little play strength. That was not the case. He felt like he was just trying to win with speed and bend, and these guys were having none of it. I think he had some reps against the Washington tackle that I was talking about, where I would have loved to see if he can generate some power against a lighter tackle, and he didn't go for it. So Javon Solomon out of Troy, Jalen Harrell out of Michigan. I mean, honestly, I guess Roman Wilson had a good week, but for a bunch of national champions, the Michigan guys did not have the best weeks. Jalen Harrell, he was actually the guy. I mean, I don't know that he won a rep otherwise, but he was the one against Sam Malu or whatever the BYU tackle's last name is. Jalen Harrell was the one that got his hands inside early, and the guy just Sayamalu, or I think it's something else. I think I'm saying his name wrong, but he just literally went nowhere. So Jalen Harrell had a bad week. Adiza Isaac out of Penn State had a really bad week. I've heard some people say that he had a chance to get, kind of pass up Chop Robinson or get viewed in that same mold. Yikes, man. He had to have ended up on the ground like 5 times trying to bend, trying to win with counters, and he might have had the worst week out of all these guys not named Jordan Jefferson. I don't think he had a single win. Tyler Davis, interior D lineman out of Clemson, was getting locked up all week. And then Keith Randolph Jr., our last guy here, out of Illinois. And he, I think, is a tweener. He was taking some reps inside and out, 6'3", 296. Just not a lot of wins from him. So definitely some lower level competition with some of these dudes that I do think those names hurt their draft stock. All right, I'm not going to waste any more time getting out of here. Really fun show. If I wasn't having fun doing this, I don't know that I could have gotten through this because I feel like crap. But I really hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button here on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast feed, if you have a second to please leave a 5-star review. It really helps me out. If you're listening to this on the main channel, make sure you go follow the Fully Inflated Football Podcast over on YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on a lot of TFG content, a lot of draft talk, and stuff. So we are out of here. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back within the week with tons more content. And peace out. Thanks for watching.